That's how much time the cardiologist had given her between the pre-op consult and the operating room. 6 days between the morning my mother stood in her kitchen and told me she wished I had never been her daughter, and the morning a stranger's heart was going to be sewn into her chest. I didn't know about the 6 days yet when she said it. I only knew the words. I want you to sit with that for a second, the way I had to, because for the better part of a week I thought my mother meant it. I thought I'd finally seen who she really was underneath 30 years of birthday cakes and permission slips signed at the kitchen counter. I was wrong about almost everything except how it ended. And I only got there because I refused to stop counting the hours she had left to explain herself. My mother is not a cruel woman. I need you to know that going in, because if I'd heard this story from someone else, out of order, I might have assumed otherwise. She's the kind of mother who kept a spreadsheet of everyone's allergies for every school potluck for a decade. She's the kind who drove 40 minutes in an ice storm once because I said I didn't feel good, before I even finished the sentence. So when she said what she said to me, in her own kitchen, on the one day of the year built around celebrating exactly what she is to me, I didn't have a single frame of reference for it. I only had 6 days to build one. Mother's Day started with hydrangeas. I bought the pale blue ones because they were her favorite, the kind that only turn that color if the soil's acidic enough, and I stood in the nursery aisle for 10 minutes texting my best friend Priya a photo, asking, does this look too funeral-y like an idiot? Who thinks that about flowers for their own mother? Turns out, apparently, someone whose body is already halfway to telling her the truth before her mouth catches up. By 9 a.m., I was in her kitchen on Larkspur Street, the same kitchen I'd eaten cereal in for 18 years before I moved out, setting the hydrangeas in the chipped blue mug she's never once let anyone throw away, no matter how many times my dad suggested it. My brother Eli was already at the table, slouched over his phone, 24 years old, and still dressing like he'd rolled straight out of bed for this. My dad, Walt, was doing the thing he does when he's nervous, which is reorganize the spice rack for absolutely no reason, alphabetizing things that didn't need alphabetizing. My mother, Run, came down the stairs slower than I'd ever seen her move. I noticed the slowness. I noticed her hand gripping the banister a beat too long on the last 2 steps. I let myself explain it away. She twisted her knee gardening. She said that a lot lately, because some part of me already understood, on a level I hadn't given words to yet, that if I let myself really look at her, I was going to see something I wasn't ready to see. Morning, birthday girl, I said, because it was a joke we'd had since I was 12, Mother's Day as her second birthday. She used to laugh at that every single year, no matter how many times I said it. She didn't laugh. She looked at the hydrangeas like they'd insulted her personally. You didn't have to, she said, which from most mothers would be simple politeness. From mine, that morning, it came out flat, almost annoyed, almost like she was bracing for something. I made her breakfast anyway. Eggs, the burnt toast she pretends to like, because I burned it once as a kid and cried about it, coffee exactly the color she takes it, more cream than coffee at this point. Eli gave her a card he'd clearly bought at a gas station 40 minutes earlier, the sticker still half peeled off the price tag. Dad kissed her cheek on his way past and she flinched, just barely, a half-inch pull back, like his mouth was too warm against her skin. I noticed that too. I filed it away instead of asking, because that's what you do in families like mine. You notice things and you file them away and you call it respecting privacy. Growing up, Mother's Day in our house always had this strange double gravity to it. Mornings that started warm and predictable, cards and pancakes, and afternoons that would quietly go soft and strange, my mother disappearing upstairs for an hour to rest her eyes, coming back down with her face freshly washed like she'd been crying and didn't want it known. I used to think every family had a version of that. I used to think mothers just got tired sometimes, on the one day that was supposed to be about them, from all the giving. It never once occurred to me, not for 29 years, that the tiredness had a name and a birth date of its own. Around 11, my Aunt Carol dropped by with an old photo album she'd borrowed years back to scan for a family tree project that never went anywhere. She set it on the coffee table, casual, and my mother's whole body went rigid, the specific rigid you go when you know a bee is somewhere in the room and you just haven't seen it land yet. I'll look at it later, Mom said, too fast, already moving toward the kitchen. I picked the album up out of pure habit, flipping toward the middle, and a photo corner, just a torn triangle of glossy paper No image on it. Nothing. Slid loose from between 2 pages and fluttered down onto the carpet. I bent to pick it up. "What's that from?" I asked, holding up the scrap. My mother crossed the kitchen in 3 fast steps and took the album out of my hands hard enough that the spine cracked audibly. "Nothing. It's nothing, Josie." I laughed, because I genuinely didn't understand yet that laughing was the wrong move, that there are moments in a family's history where the wrong joke lands like a lit match. "Okay, Fort Knox," I said. "I was just being nice enough to actually get you a card that wasn't purchased at a Sunoco, unlike some people." "Do you ever stop?" she said. The kitchen went quiet in the particular way a room goes quiet right before something breaks. Eli looked up from his phone for the first time all morning. Dad's hand froze mid-jar on the spice rack. "Stop what?" I said. "Performing." Her voice had climbed somewhere I had never once heard it go, not at me, not in 29 years. "The flowers, the eggs, the jokes about birthdays. You think showing up with a smile and a card fixes everything, Josephine. You think I owe you the same performance back. I don't. I can't. Not this year. Not." She stopped herself. Her hand was shaking around the album's edge. "Mom," I said, and I heard how small my own voice had gotten, how much younger than 29 I suddenly felt. "You know what?" she said, and something in her face shifted into a place I didn't recognize, a place past anger into something closer to grief, wearing anger's clothes. "I wish." She looked at me the way you look at something you're about to drop on purpose, already grieving the sound of it hitting the floor. "I wish you'd never been my daughter." Nobody moved. Eli's phone sat forgotten in his hand, screen still lit. My dad said her name, just her name. "Run." Soft, like a hand on a shoulder that came half a second too late to stop anything. She turned and went upstairs. I heard the bedroom door lock, that specific small click that meant business. That meant do not follow me. I stood in my mother's kitchen holding flowers she hadn't wanted, and I thought, okay, there it is. Whatever I've spent 29 years not letting myself see, that was it. Finally out loud. Eli said my name. I didn't answer him. I left 20 minutes later without telling anyone goodbye, hydrangeas still sitting in the chipped mug on the counter, and I drove home with both hands white-knuckled on the wheel, replaying 5 words over and over, already rewriting my entire childhood around them. I didn't know that in 6 days I'd understand I had gotten the whole story backward. I only knew, driving away from that house, that something in me had just quietly, permanently changed. I didn't sleep. I called her 4 times that night, straight to voicemail every time, her voice cheerful and recorded and 2 years out of date, telling me to leave a message after the tone like nothing in the world was wrong. Priya came over around midnight with a bottle of wine we didn't open and sat with me on my kitchen floor while I said the same 5 words out loud maybe 30 different ways, trying to find an angle on them that didn't hurt. "Maybe she's just stressed about something," Priya said, careful, the way you talk to someone standing near a ledge. "That's a specific kind of cruel, Joe. People don't usually say that unless something's cracking underneath them." "That's generous of you," I said. "She meant it. You didn't see her face." "I didn't," Priya agreed. "You're the one who did. I just don't think it adds up with the mom you've described to me for 6 years. The one who drove to your apartment at midnight when your car battery died in February. That woman doesn't wake up one Sunday and mean something like that." "People change. People crack," Priya said. "That's different than changing. I've seen you crack before, Joe. It usually comes out looking like something it isn't." I didn't have a real answer for that, not that night. I went to bed around 4 and didn't sleep past 6, replaying 5 words against a lifetime of midnight car batteries and 40-minute drives through ice storms, and none of it fit together the way it should have. By 10 the next morning I drove back to Larkspur Street with a speech half built in my head, something between "I deserve an explanation" and "I'm sorry for whatever I did," which tells you how little I still understood about what had actually happened in that kitchen. My dad answered the door before I'd finished knocking, which meant he'd seen my car pull in and come to intercept me. He stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door mostly shut behind him, the specific way you close a door when you don't want anyone inside to hear. "She's resting," he said. "I want to talk to her." "Not today, Josie." Over his shoulder, through the gap in the door, I could see a duffel bag sitting at the bottom of the stairs. Not a weekend bag, the big one, the one we used to take to Michigan every summer when I was a kid. Folded on top of it was a stack of what looked like paperwork, and clipped to the paperwork was a plastic hospital wristband, the kind they print your name and birth date on before a procedure. "Dad, what is that?" "It's nothing you need to worry about right now. There's a hospital bracelet sitting on the stairs." His jaw to the thing it does when he's deciding how much truth he's allowed to hand out and how much he's promised someone else he won't. "Your mother has an appointment. That's all I can tell you today." "An appointment for what?" "Josie." His phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at it, and something in his face went pale in a way that had nothing to do with me. "I have to take this," he said, already stepping back inside. "Dad." "A few days," he said from the doorway, and his voice cracked on it in a way I'd never once heard from him in 29 years. "I need you to trust me for a few days. Please." The door shut. I sat in my car in the driveway for a long time after that, staring at the porch light that hadn't turned off from the night before I could make myself drive away. Eli finally answered my text the next afternoon. We met at the diner off Route 9 because neither of us could stand the idea of sitting in that house. He looked terrible, the specific tired of someone who hasn't been sleeping either, but for longer than I had, the kind of tired that's been compounding for weeks instead of days. "You knew," I said, before he'd even fully sat down. "Whatever's going on. You knew before Sunday." He turned his coffee cup a slow half circle on the table without drinking it. "Some of it." "Eli, Mom's heart's failing," he said, fast, like ripping tape off skin. "Not a heart attack. This has been happening for a while. Months, maybe longer than that. She's been swelling up in her ankles, tired constantly, short of breath walking up the stairs, and she kept telling everyone it was her knee acting up. It's not her knee, Joe. It's never been her knee." The diner noise went distant in my ears, the clatter of plates, and somebody's kid crying 2 booths over. "How long have you known?" "Since March." He said it like a confession. "I only found out because I drove her to a cardiology appointment she couldn't get herself to and Dad couldn't get off work for. She made me swear before we even walked in the door." "Swear what?" "Not to tell you." He wouldn't look at me now. Her exact words, "You'd make it into something. That you'd hover, ask 100 questions, turn into a full-time nurse overnight, and she couldn't handle that on top of everything else she was already carrying." I felt that land somewhere under my ribs, sharp. So instead she waited until Mother's Day to tell me she regrets I was ever born. "That's not what Does Dad know you told me?" "No," Eli said, and for the first time he actually looked scared. "And I need you to not make this about that right now, because if she finds out I broke my promise on top of everything else going on, I don't know what that does to her this week. I'm telling you because I think you not knowing is worse than me breaking a promise. I don't know if that's the right call." "I made it anyway." "It's the right call," I said, and I meant it, even through the anger. "When's the appointment?" "The one with the duffel bag on the stairs." Eli looked down at his coffee like it owed him an answer. "Saturday. They found a donor match faster than anyone expected. Some kind of priority listing because of how far her heart's declined the past few weeks. 6 days out from Sunday. She's getting a transplant, Joe. A whole new heart." I sat back in the booth like I'd been shoved. "She's having open heart surgery in 6 days," I said. And the very last thing she said to me before I found any of this out was that she wished I didn't exist. "I don't think that's actually what she meant," Eli said quietly, finally looking up. "She said the words. I was standing right there." "I know what she said." He rubbed both hands over his face. "There's something else going on, Joe. Something about Mother's Day specifically. It's not just this year, it's every year. She's always weird on Mother's Day. Always. For as long as I can remember. She gets quiet in the morning, snappish by afternoon, and she disappears into her room for a while and comes back like nothing happened. I always figured that was just her. You know how she gets sometimes. I hadn't let myself notice that pattern out loud before, not once, but the second he said it I realized I had been quietly absorbing it my entire life without ever giving it a name. "Ask Aunt Carol," Eli said, "if anyone knows why it's her. She and Mom don't keep much from each other. Never have." I called Carol from the parking lot before I'd even finished my coffee. Carol lived 20 minutes out in a rancher with a wind chime on the porch that never once stopped moving, even on days with no wind that I could feel. She let me in before I'd finished my second knock, took one look at my face, and put the kettle on without asking whether I wanted tea. "I need to know what's actually going on with Mom," I said, before I'd even sat down at her kitchen table. Not the heart thing. Eli told me about that already. I mean the other thing. Why she looks like she's underwater every single Mother's Day of my entire life. Why she said what she said to me. Carol's hands went still on the counter mid-motion, like someone had paused her. She didn't tell you, she said. It wasn't a question. Tell me what, Carol? Carol turned around slowly, and for a second she looked like she was doing math in her head. How much of this was hers to hand over? How much time was actually left before Saturday to keep handing it over slowly the way my mother clearly would have preferred? You had a twin, she said finally. A sister. Her name was Grace. The kitchen seemed to tilt a few degrees. That's not. What are you talking about? You were born a twin, Josie. Baby A and Baby B. That's what the chart called the two of you before either of you had names picked out. There were complications during delivery. Grace's cord had compressed hard, her oxygen was dropping fast, and the doctors had minutes to make decisions, not hours. They got you out safely. They couldn't get to her in time. Carol's voice had gone slow and careful, the voice of someone who'd rehearsed a version of this in her head 100 times over the years and never once actually had to say it out loud until now. She lived. 4 hours, Josie. Your mother held her the entire time. Wouldn't let a single nurse take her, not even to weigh her. I put my hand flat on the counter because I needed something solid underneath me. Grace died on Mother's Day, Carol said. Not near it. That exact day, the actual date, and it has landed on that same calendar day every single year since, because that's just how the math works out most years. Your mother had you in one arm in that hospital room, and 3 days later she buried her other daughter, and every year since, that date comes back around the calendar and drags every second of it back up with it. 29 years. I said, my voice not sounding like mine. She's been carrying this for 29 years, and nobody ever thought to. She made everyone promise, Carol said, and her own eyes were wet now too. Your dad, me, your grandmother, while she was still alive, she didn't want you carrying it, Josie. She said you didn't ask to survive something, and she wasn't going to hand her surviving daughter a lifetime of guilt just for the crime of being alive. So instead she handed me that. I said, and I heard my own voice crack wide open. She told me she wished I'd never existed and let me spend 6 years, my whole life, thinking that was somehow about me. Carol reached across the counter and put both her hands over mine, warm and steady. I don't think she was talking to you when she said it, sweetheart. I think 29 years finally came out sideways. 6 days before a surgery that might genuinely kill her, on the one day of the entire calendar year she's never once gotten to just be a mother without also being a woman who buried a baby 3 days after giving birth to 2 of them. I think you got hit by something that's been aimed at herself this whole time. Every year. Just quieter than this. I didn't say anything for a long moment. The wind chime kept moving outside like nothing in the world had just cracked open in that kitchen. If you'd been sitting where I was sitting, hearing that for the first time with a surgery 6 days away and a mother who wouldn't answer her phone, I don't know what you'd have done first. I know what I did. I asked Carol the only question left that actually mattered. Does it ever get easier for her? I asked. 29 years in. Carol considered that honestly instead of just offering comfort. I don't think easier is the right word for grief like that. I think she's gotten better at hiding it from everyone except herself. That's not the same thing as it getting smaller. Some years it barely shows. This year, with the surgery stacked right on top of the date, I think it finally had nowhere left to go but out. I wish she'd let me help carry some of it. Any of it. She thought she was helping you by not letting you, Carol said. I know that sounds backward. Grief does that to people, especially people who love as hard as your mother does. She'd rather drown quietly than let the people she loves get wet. There's more, Carol said, before I could even ask it, reading it off my face. There's a box. Your mother's kept things. Some of Grace's. Some she made herself. Years ago, private things. I don't know everything that's inside it. I know she's never once let anyone open it. Not your father, not me. If you want the whole truth before Saturday, before that operating room, that's probably where the rest of it is waiting. I told myself I wasn't going to do it. I sat in my car outside my parents' house for 40 minutes straight telling myself that. Then I let myself in with my own key, because my mother was at a pre-op appointment across town, and my father was covering a last-minute shift he couldn't get out of, and I went up to their bedroom and opened the cedar chest at the foot of the bed, the one piece of furniture in that house I had never, in 29 years, once seen anyone lift the lid on. Under a folded quilt was a manila folder, soft and worn at the corners from years of quiet handling, labeled in my mother's handwriting in faded blue ink, Baby A/Baby B. Inside were things that stopped being an abstract fact Carol had told me an hour before and became instantly, unbearably real. A hospital bracelet, tiny, printed with a name I'd never once heard until 60 minutes ago, matched against an identical one printed with mine somewhere in that same nursery 29 years back. A knit cap the size of my fist, pale yellow, handmade, the stitches slightly uneven like whoever made it had been crying while they worked. A single photograph, the first one I'd ever seen of her, a nurse's gloved hands holding a baby wrapped tight in a hospital blanket, my mother's face turned toward the camera, wrecked and soft at exactly the same time, 29 years younger, and holding both grief and love in the same expression. At the bottom of the folder, under a stack of hospital paperwork I couldn't make myself fully read, was a cassette tape. A sticky note on it, handwriting faded almost to nothing, read, "For Josie, when she's old enough." I was 29 years old. Old enough had come and gone a decade ago at least, and the tape had just sat there the whole time, ungiven, waiting for a version of the truth-telling that had apparently never once felt safe enough to happen. I found an old cassette player buried in a box in Eli's childhood bedroom, dust thick on the buttons, batteries somehow still holding a charge, and I sat on the edge of his old bed with my hands shaking and pressed play. My mother's voice came through younger than I had ever once heard it, tired in a completely different register than the tired I was used to. "Hi, baby girl. If you're hearing this, I finally worked up the nerve, or maybe I didn't and your dad found this after I chickened out for the 100th time and put it away somewhere you'd eventually find it. You had a sister, Grace. I don't know how to tell you that to your face without you thinking I'm telling you that you're not enough, because you are Josie. You have always been enough, every single day of your life. And that is exactly why I have never once been able to say any of this out loud. Loving you sometimes feels like betraying her. I know that's not fair to put on you. It was never fair. I'm still working on how to carry all of this without handing pieces of it to you to carry too. I love you both. I always have. I always will." The tape clicked off, hissing quietly into empty tape. I sat there in my little brother's childhood bedroom and cried in a way I hadn't cried since I was a kid. Not because my mother had been cruel to me, but because she'd been quietly drowning for 29 years in a house full of people who loved her and never once knew there was a rope to throw. Underneath where the tape had been, folded into a small, brittle square, was a note in my grandmother's handwriting, dated the same week Grace died. 2 lines, nothing more. "Run, this is not your fault. I need you to say it back to me, even if you don't believe it yet." There was no answer written below it. My mother had kept the question for 29 years without ever once writing the answer down. I put everything back exactly the way I'd found it. Folder squared, quilt refold over the top, cassette tucked back under the paperwork, my hands shaking the whole time, terrified of the sound of a car in the driveway before I could get the lid of that chest closed. I sat on the edge of my parents' bed afterward for a long time, just breathing, feeling like I'd trespassed into the one room of my mother's life she had spent 3 decades keeping locked, even from herself. My phone buzzed on the bedspread. A text from my mother. "Home soon. Please don't be at the house. I can't tonight." I looked at the time. 2 days left, and I had less time to fix any of this than I'd had just to understand it in the first place. Pre-op admissions started at 7 the next morning. I was in the waiting room by 6:40, a coffee I never once drank going cold in my hands, watching the automatic doors for my parents' car to pull up. When she walked in, gown bag tucked under one arm, my dad's hand steady at the small of her back, she saw me before I could decide whether to look away, and something in her face braced immediately for another fight. "Josie, I found the tape," I said. I hadn't planned to lead with that. 6 days of pressure just pushed it straight out of me. "I know about Grace." She went very still, right there in the middle of the admissions waiting room. Behind her, my dad closed his eyes the way a man closes his eyes when a moment he's dreaded for years is finally actually happening. "Can we not do this right now?" she said, low, glancing at the intake desk. "I have to check in 20 minutes, Josie. You have surgery tomorrow that might kill you," I said, and my voice was shaking, but I didn't stop it. And I am not going to let the last real conversation we ever have be you telling me you wish I didn't exist. I need more time than 20 minutes, and I need it now. Something in her cracked open right there by the coffee machine, in front of strangers filling out clipboards. I didn't mean it like that, she said, and her voice was shaking too now. I have never once, not for a single second of your entire life, wished you weren't my daughter. That is the last thing in this world that's true. It's the exact opposite of true. Then why did you say it, Mom? Because it was the truth turned completely inside out, she said. Because I have spent 29 Mother's Days loving you so much it terrifies me, and hating myself in the exact same breath. Because loving you the way I do means I survive something. Not a choice. They didn't let me choose. The doctors made that call in about 90 seconds, and there was nothing I could have done differently. I know that logically, but it has always felt like choosing. Some part of me has never once forgiven myself for getting to keep the daughter who lived. And this year, staring down a surgery that might mean I don't get to keep either of you much longer, all 29 years of that finally came out of me sideways, and it landed on the one person who least deserved to catch it. You could have just told me, I said, crying openly now, right there by the vending machines. Any of the 29 years, Mom. You could have told me any of it. I was trying to protect you from something. I never learned how to survive myself, she said. I understand now that's not the same thing as actually protecting you. I traded one wound for a completely different one and handed it to you without even telling you what it was. A nurse called her name from the desk. She didn't move toward it. I don't forgive you yet. I told her honestly, because it was true and because I didn't think either of us needed a comfortable lie in that moment. But I'm not going anywhere. I need you to come out of that surgery tomorrow so we can actually do the rest of this the right way. Slowly, both of us telling the truth from now on all the way through. She reached out and took my hand the way she used to when I was small enough to need help crossing a street. 24 hours, she said. I'll fight for every single one of them, Josie. I promise you that. They admitted her that evening for overnight monitoring before the morning surgery. I stayed until visiting hours technically ended, sitting in a stiff vinyl chair beside a bed with rails on it, watching a monitor chart the rhythm of a heart that was, in less than a day, going to be replaced entirely. Tell me about her, I said. Grace. Something real. Not the hospital chart version Carol gave me. My mother smiled for the first time in 6 days. Small, sad, and completely true. She had your father's stubborn chin, she said. Even at a few hours old, I could already see it. I only got to hold her for 4 hours, and I knew that much already. We talked until a nurse gently reminded me visiting hours were over. In the hallway outside, my dad caught my arm before I could leave. I should have told you, he said, quiet, like it had been sitting in his chest for years waiting for permission. Every year I watched her disappear on that one day, and I told myself keeping her secret was the same thing as protecting our family. I don't think it was. I think I just let her carry it alone, because it was easier than making her talk about it. I'm sorry, Josie. That's on me too, not just her. I hugged him for the first time in longer than I could remember. We'll figure out the rest of it together, I said. After tomorrow. Eli found me in the hallway a few minutes later, hands jammed in his pockets, looking younger than 24. I've been so mad at her all week for making me keep this from you, he said. And now I just feel bad for ever being mad. I don't know how she carried all of it and still remembered my dentist appointments. Because that's who she is, I said. Underneath all of it. That never stopped being true, even during the worst part of Sunday. I know that now, he said. Took me longer than it should have. Took me the same, I said, and we stood there together in that hospital hallway a while longer, neither of us in a hurry to say anything else. 3 hours left. I was back before sunrise. My dad was already there, gray-faced, gripping a coffee he clearly wasn't drinking. Eli came in 10 minutes after me, still in yesterday's shirt, hair pushed up on one side from sleeping, or not sleeping, sitting up in a chair. They moved my mother's bed to a pre-op bay at 5:40. A resident ran through the risks in a flat, practiced voice, bleeding, rejection, infection, the specific brutal math of an open-heart transplant, and my mother listened to all of it without flinching once, because I think, in some strange way, she'd already survived the worst thing a person can survive, once, in a delivery room 29 years ago, and this felt to her like her second time doing it. They let us in 2 at a time before she went back. My dad went first, holding her hand and saying something I couldn't hear and didn't try to. Then Eli, quick, fierce, telling her to be stubborn in there, that stubborn was her best quality and she should use every bit of it. Then me, last, because I'd asked to be last. I love you, I told her. I loved you before I found that tape, and I love you more now, not less, knowing everything I know. I need you to hold on to that going in there. I love you too, she said, gripping my hand hard. Both my daughters. Always both, Josie. I need you to know I've never once loved you as half of anything. A tech came to unlock the wheels on the bed. See you on the other side, she said, and I made myself smile instead of cry, because that's what she needed from me in that exact second, and for the first time in 6 days, I actually knew how to give her that without it feeling like a performance at all. They wheeled her through double doors marked no entry beyond this point at 6:41 in the morning, and my father, my brother, and I sat down in a waiting room that smelled like burnt coffee and floor cleaner, and none of us moved from those chairs for the next 6 hours. If you were sitting where we were sitting, watching that clock crawl, I don't know what you'd have done with those 6 hours. I know what we did. We told stories about her. All the good ones. The loud laugh she has at her own jokes, the way she still calls Eli by his baby nickname when she's not thinking about it, the terrible off-key singing in the car that used to embarrass me in middle school, and that I would give almost anything to hear again right now. At hour 2, my dad started telling us about the day he proposed to her, a story I'd heard a dozen times growing up and never once tired of, and I understood, listening to him tell it again in that plastic chair, that he was doing the exact same thing I was, trying to hold on to every ordinary, happy version of her he had, in case he needed all of them at once by the end of the day. At hour 4, a woman in scrubs came out to update a different family sitting 2 rows over, and I watched my father's whole body flinch like he'd been struck, already bracing for that same walk to eventually have our name attached to it. At hour 5, a nurse pulled Eli aside for a moment I couldn't hear over the television bolted to the wall, and I stopped breathing entirely until I saw his shoulders drop with relief instead of collapse. They hit a complication, he told us, sitting back down. Some bleeding they had to manage mid-procedure. She's stable now. They're closing her up. I texted Priya 4 words, still in surgery, praying, and she called immediately, and I let it ring twice before I let myself pick up, because I needed 1 more second of silence before I let anyone else's voice into that particular fear. At hour 6 and 12 minutes, the surgeon came out in a fresh set of scrubs, mask pulled down around his neck, and I have never in my life read a stranger's face as fast or as hard as I read his in that hallway. She did well, he said. It was not an easy case. We had that bleeding to manage, which added time, but her new heart is beating entirely on its own right now, and at this stage, that is exactly what we were hoping to see. My father made a sound I had never once heard him make before, somewhere between a laugh and a sob, both hands over his face. Eli grabbed my hand, so hard it actually hurt, and neither of us let go. I thought about the very first line of everything, the words in that kitchen, the 6 days that followed, the sister I never once got to meet. And I understood, finally, standing in that hallway, that the sentence my mother said to me on Mother's Day had never really been about me at all. It had been the sound of 29 years of unspoken grief, finding the smallest possible crack to finally escape through, 6 days before she might have lost her only remaining chance to ever take it back. She came home 11 days later, slower than before, thinner, a long scar down the center of her chest that she'll carry for whatever life this new heart gives her. The first Mother's Day after her surgery, I didn't bring hydrangeas to Larkspur Street. Instead, I drove her out to the small cemetery on the edge of town, to a headstone I had never once in 29 years stood in front of, and we planted a young maple sapling beside it together, her hand still weak from recovery, mine steadying the root ball while she packed the loose dirt in around it with her palms. "Happy birthday, Grace," my mother said, and it was the first time in my entire life I'd heard her say that name out loud without her whole body flinching around it. I think about those 6 days constantly. How close I came to spending the rest of my life believing the worst possible version of the woman who raised me, all because grief doesn't always come out as tears. Sometimes it comes out sideways, as the cruelest 5 words you've ever heard someone you love say straight to your face. I think about what I would have done with those 6 days if I hadn't gone looking for the truth underneath the words. I think about what you would do if you were handed a hard deadline and a person you loved who was running out of time to tell you the real reason they'd hurt you. I didn't get my mother back exactly the way she was before that Sunday. What I got instead was something better, a mother who finally let me carry half of what she'd been carrying entirely alone since before I could even talk. It cost us 6 of the hardest days either of us has ever lived through in either order. Some Mother's Days now, we still go quiet in the afternoon, the two of us on purpose. We don't hide it from each other anymore. Sometimes we sit by that little maple tree and don't say much of anything at all, and that silence feels nothing like the one that used to come out of that locked bedroom door. It feels like two people who finally know exactly what they're sitting with it together instead of apart. If somebody handed you 6 days and told you it might be the only 6 days you ever got to fix the worst thing a person you loved ever said to you, I hope you'd do what I did. I hope you go looking for the truth underneath the words, instead of just the words themselves. Most cruelty, in my experience, is grief wearing a disguise it never wanted to wear in the first place. You just have to be willing to stay in the room long enough to watch it slip. I would live every hour of those 6 days again, in exactly that order, if it meant getting to stand on the other side of those double doors with her one more time.